I did a video looking at 80s hair bands trying to adapt after Nirvana destroyed their whole genre. I want to start by saying that's not at all what's going on here because, while heavy music definitely changed when nu metal came along, it did not ruin the reputation of the old guard. We were not dragging classic metal band names through the mud in the mid-90s. Iron Maiden ruled. Judas Priest ruled. Metallica ruled. Megadeth ruled. Do I need to go on? But while established heavier bands weren't desperately trying to redesign and redefine themselves to survive, they were still existing in a very changing musical world. The definition of heavy was evolving, and whether they feared becoming obsolete, or whether they were trying to sell out and cash in, or whether they were just digging what these kids were throwing down and wanted to try and inject a little freshness, a few of these old school metal bands took a ride on the Nu Metal Express. And we're going to take a look back at how that worked out for them. Let's find out. The first and earliest band to look at here is Sepultura, the classic 80s thrashers who in 1995 just straight up called Korn's producer Ross Robinson and said, "Let's make a record and get Jonathan Davis and DJ Lethal on it. Let's go." I remember when this came out, hearing that they even asked to use Korn's amps and pedals and stuff. And I'll be straight, even if they didn't go that far, they might as well have. These guitars sound of Korn for sure, like hot oozing sludge. I was looking up some recent stuff on this album, and apparently Max Cavalera doesn't consider it a nu metal album, but rather calls it more caveman. I acknowledge what he means, but there is way too much Ross Robinson and Korn stuff going on here to say it's not nu metal. But it is more than just nu metal. Couple things. And the first one is a big one and kind of crazy when I noted. Roots came out in 1996. Korn's first album was out, Deftones' Adrenaline was out, but that's it. Limp Bizkit's $3 Bill Y'all wouldn't even drop until 1997. Nu metal was making its first waves, but it was not the mainstream to ape yet. What I think really happened was Max heard Korn and his head exploded, damn, this is what I want to be doing. For all the groove that Sepultura were heading toward on Chaos AD, their previous album that was already a pivot away from thrash to groove metal, well, Korn and the way that they handled rhythm and tempo and angst were like the end game to that. Sepultura simply took the thrash to groove metal to nu metal pipeline. The other big note to make here is along with the tempos and grooves of nu metal, they merged the music of their native Brazilian indigenous people on this record hardcore. They flew down to Mato Grosso, Brazil and recorded the Zavante tribe and in general blended tons of Brazilian percussion and tribal vocalizations on this record. So they didn't just go nu metal, they went world music to an equal degree. And of course, more specifically, their own culture's music. Thrash or even groove metal didn't offer this level of sound blending with traditional Brazilian music. And that's what I think really made Max's eyes go wide when he heard what nu metal was doing, or hell, barely just yet setting out to do for the first time. This record is so soon, you really can't call it nu metal aping, even for as much as it has Korn all over it when you take everything into consideration. It's first wave nu metal, or they're as much initiators of the nu metal wave as Korn and Deftones and Bizkit themselves. It is nu metal in large part, but they wear it honestly. I bought it back then, and I don't just mean I bought the record, which I did, but I mean I bought the concept, and I still buy it today. Roots holds up. After this, Max left the band over management disagreements and started Soulfly, while Sepultura soldiered on without him. So this is the one moment Sepultura fully clicked into this mode, and it's a pretty good moment. In general, I think of Slayer as being of the AC/DC music delivery system. Not meaning to say they put out the same album over and over, but the brand is pretty defined, and when you buy a Slayer record, you know what you're gonna get. There's some kind of core formula at work. So for Slayer to change things up enough to raise nu metal alarm bells with people was a bit of a surprise, which is what people were complaining about when Diabolus in Musica dropped in 1998. I avoided this one in the original era because the idea of a Slayer nu metal album always sounded really uninviting to me. So I'm giving these thoughts from finally checking it out all these years later. Out of the gates, the album intro is a groovier piece of music, but the first track kicks in full blast with pretty classic Slayer. As the album unfurls, the nu metal influences definitely start to ring through, but there is nothing to be ashamed of here. No overt vocal inflection aping. Tom Araya still sounds like Tom Araya. Maybe at a few points they tried putting a weird chorus or filtering effect on him or something, but honestly that's cool. The album takes its name, Diabolus in Musica, which translates to the devil in music, from a phrase that refers to the tritone chord. The tritone is definitely the chord of nu metal. Think of those discordant chords on the first Korn album. But it's also the chord of classic metal. Think of the main riff from Black Sabbath's titular song Black Sabbath off of the album Black Sabbath. Oh, and also, you know, this one epic riff from this one absolutely classic metal song. What is it? Raining Blood? Yeah. Now, I doubt Slayer were trying to go deep or underscore those kind of comparisons or make some bigger unifying statement. I think they were just like, devil chord, dude, which truly is what all forms of metal are about, but it does carry an interesting parallel here for an old school metal band bringing in some of what was new school at the time. But I fully expected, at this point actually even hoped for some Tom Araya rapping or something, or some of those high-pitched Korn-style tritone guitar skronks, or maybe a flapping fieldy bass sound, but most of the devil in the music here is just in the heavy and more mid-tempo, nu metalish grinding riffage. I'd say this album just takes the good and organic elements of what was nu metal at the time and blends it into an attempt at an updated Slayer. And again, does it in a relatively admirable way, avoiding all the tropes and pitfalls of nu metal. Okay, we do get some moody kind of talk whisper whine vocals on the track Desire, but it quickly kicks back into form. I'm kind of surprised they got so much flack for this. I'm sorry I didn't check it out at the time, and I'll come back to this again as a listener. Diabolus in Musica rips. Wouldn't really call it a nu metal album, just one that has some of that flavor baked in. And in that regard, they stayed true to their delivery system. Also just goes to show how protective fans can be when they are used to such a specific and classic aesthetic. From the talk at the time, I expected way more ridiculousness than what was going on here. This also comes right after an album of hardcore punk covers, 1996's Undisputed Attitude, an album which also rips. So in general, it was cool that in the mid to late 90s, Slayer was throwing some curveballs out there and managing to keep the vibe right through it all.
What was that? It's nothing. I'm sure it's nothing. It's all right, okay? It's just a story.
Huh. I definitely remember grumbles about Anthrax going nu metal when they dropped Volume 8, which also was released in 1998. And let me tell you, by 1998, hearing more nu metal in general was the last thing I was trying to do. Like Slayer's Diabolus, I avoided this one. It was kind of a drag to hear. Another classic thrash band had caved in and sold out, or so my brain vaguely thought. So when I went in for a listen on Volume 8 to talk about it for this video, I was surprised that, unlike Diabolus, which started with a definite nu metal flavor, I didn't pick up anything from the first song on the record. Nothing from the second song either. Look, one of my favorite albums from the earlier 90s was Anthrax's album, The Sound of White Noise, which was a great blending of alternative and metal, a bit of groove, and The sound fit perfectly with new singer John Bush's melodic, lower registered, aggressive, but alluring vocals. Quick aside, I think that's what Motley Crue wished would happen with John Corabi, and it kinda did. But for Anthrax, it totally worked. Stomp 442 got a little more aggressive, but still blended it all well. Anyway, the first 2 tracks on Volume 8 just sound like more of that good 90s alternative metal Anthrax mode. Like, I was beginning to wonder if I should even talk about this album at all. But then track 3, the single, Inside Out, hits, and okay, man, I get it. There's a definite nu metal-y guitar groove here. But that's about as far as it goes. It makes sense they dropped it as the single, but it's almost a bait and switch because the rest of this album just kicks back to that alternative metal mode, a mode which they do well. Again, I have missed out on a cool album because in 1998, everything was stupid, everyone was stupid, and I also was stupid. Still am. But let's talk about it. That's what we're here to do. There's definitely a conscious taste of nu metal in the guitar groove on Inside Out, and maybe a couple other spots on the record. But if just for the sake of analysis I ask myself, does anything here remind me of Korn or Bizkit or Deftones even? The answer is no. Maybe a touch of Bizkit bounce in the guitar riff on Inside Out. Maybe a touch of Deftones haze in some of the tracks I'm calling alternative metal. But really that's a lot more vague to call, and that's ultimately a stretch. John Bush keeps the vocals John Bush. There's no whining, there's no growling, no rapping, even on the single. In fact, this is a pretty solid collection of songs with some good hooks in that not overt, non-pop metal way Anthrax can do so well. There's a kind of wacky country-ish song. There's a short, comedic kind of SOD style metal song about coffee. It's actually a really versatile record. Probably more versatile than White Noise or Stomp. To peg this as their nu metal album is just wrong. Though, okay, sure, we can call Inside Out their nu metal single. But even that I'm doing with an asterisk. I think, if anything, they strategically picked that song as the single to try and hook some nu metal kids in. Yeah, they weren't afraid to mix in some of the modern sounds of the era, and no, they weren't sounding like 80s Anthrax at all anymore, but they hadn't been and were already doing their own thing. Anthrax went more nu metal in 91 on Attack of the Killer Bees when they covered Bring the Noise with Chuck D. These guys didn't jump on the bandwagon, and if anything, they paved the way. Get out of here. Next, please.
What you ought to do is follow for now. How will the people say? Make a miracle. Keep up the lyrical.
I almost considered not even looking at Machine Head's The Burning Red album. I know they're not an 80s old school band, and while people would cite it as a nu metal album, Machine Head were founded as a groove metal band, and I didn't really see the interest or surprise there. Like, okay, groove metal band makes an album that people consider nu metal. They didn't exactly take the pipeline like Sepultura did. They started there, pretty close to the end zone. But I gotta say, wow, the difference here between the first 2 Machine Head albums and The Burning Red is more intriguing and stark and funny than I could have expected. So they did call Ross Robinson to produce, a sure sign of what they were looking to tap, and I'm expecting some extra corny guitars and all that, but right out of the gate, the most surprising element isn't the corny stuff, it's a heavy dose of Bizkit flavor. Not just the rapping, but the cadence and the kind of rapping almost up into the higher pitch of the voice, that very distinct Fred Dursty thing. Wouldn't it be funny if I just impersonated it right now to try and give an example? Yeah, not gonna happen. But I bet you already have it in your head and know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, it's not just that. It's the way they work in every single nu metal idiosyncrasy. The Jonathan Davis style singing through the gritted teeth and breathy huffing and quivering pensive vocals. The quiet musical parts with the clean but atonal guitars that blow up loud again, including the thing nu metal bands love to do, where they get quiet, repeat a phrase over and over as the band slowly grows into a full-on rage. You know, Bizkit's Break Stuff does this, Korn's Divine does this, also adjacently, Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name of. It was a trope by this point, and that trope is here too. They also did the nu metal cover of a classic 80s song Move with The Police's Message in a Bottle, Check That Box too. Literally, every single trope is here that was not on their previous albums, short of adding a DJ. I'm genuinely surprised they didn't add a DJ. I honestly wonder what Ross Robinson would be thinking when he was with a band just regurgitating all this stuff in front of him by 1999. Was he encouraging this? It just seems so shameless. And also, this video. This is perilously close to looking like an NSYNC or Backstreet Boys video. I honestly had no idea. But now, for real, I'm not here meaning to throw shade, so let's look at some bright side. Like, the pivot totally makes sense because of the groove metal foundation, and even just considering how much of the nu metal stuff specifically was merging hip-hop with metal, and noting a fact like Machine Head doing an Ice-T cover as a bonus track on their previous album. I think they probably genuinely resonated with nu metal and saw inroads to incorporate more of their diverse influences and went there. They just happened to do it all very overtly. The album is not terrible, unless you think all nu metal is terrible, in which case, fair enough, but these days I just think it's hilarious and mildly fun. I think what is the most striking part of this one is how much changed when the proximity of the previous genre of groove metal was actually so close. I just didn't expect it to be so different. It really is kind of a perfect example of highlighting all those distinctive little nu metal tricks as a result. For real, in 1999, I would have absolutely despised this album. Probably vehemently, but looking at it now, in truth, this album is hilariously awesome, and supposedly did better than their first two albums. Like, this worked. Maybe they did want to cash in, but mission accomplished. So that's why I say, hey, good work, Machine Head. I had fun here. And now that we've looked at 4 bands I remember getting called out for going nu metal, I could say that in general with this video. I had fun here. Nu metal is funny. Life is funny. Being a human is funny. What are you gonna do?